Thank you very much. You know, the last moderator of the last panel said she's got a very tough, unenviable job of like doing this 4 o'clock, at that time 4 o'clock shift, because it's 4 o'clock. I think mine is the most difficult because it's now 5 o'clock and everyone just wants to go home, right? But we're going to try and make this as interesting as possible for the few of you here. I think it's important that we get as much rich insights as possible from our two incredibly amazing speakers over here. And maybe just to start with, I'm going to ask a very personal question, right? Because nobody is born with this idea of like, from the time they're born, let's go save the world. I mean, this is something that probably grew as that's something that probably came in you as you grew older and you noticed things were not right. And so my question to each of you is, tell me at which point or how did this suddenly come to you that you really want to do the work that you're doing in the environment? Like, what was that turning point in your journey? And also share a little bit about yourselves in the process as well. Maybe we'll start with you, Lee.
That's a very interesting question. Nature versus nurture, right? But I like to think you're right. I didn't born suddenly wanting to climb mountains or having a love of the outdoors. But I must say it's been nurtured since young. Nurtured to embrace nature as part of one of my life, ambitions. I mentioned also that being someone of a mixed race with Dusun ancestry. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dusun. Dusun people are from northern part of Borneo, Kalimantan, Borneo. So having that ancestry from young, being close to my dad, we share a love for walks, taking nature walks. That's one example of, I think, nurturing the love of nature surroundings since from young, and just being very observant, paying attention to nature, the greens, and I think it started from there.
Wonderful. So you've always grown up in this environment of caring for the environment. But my question is then, at which point did you decide to jump into the work that you're currently doing? What triggered you? What made you say, this is exactly what I want to do with my life?
I guess part of it is boredom, part of it is rage. I won't lie, there is a stimulus. One day, that day was actually 20 years ago. I was helping out my dad. Dad had one of those bring your daughter day to work kind of thing, and I was exposed to his line of work. I said, Dad, what are you doing? So he would actually show and tell me, hey, look at all this waste disposal containers that the lorries are bringing in at the industrial house. He was a building manager for a very large industrial house. He was a very prominent entrepreneur who runs about like maybe 100 companies, and he owns multiple warehouses. Some of the brands you see here, like World of Sports, so that guy is behind it. It was rage because there was one stimulus where I asked Dad, why are we having to take Nike shoes out of the warehouse and throwing them into that containers, and then, and where are they going to bring those shoes to? He said, oh, well, we have received specific instructions from the brand that if any unsold inventory, we're supposed to destroy it, discard it. And I asked him, where do the lorries going to take them? Of course, we're going to bring them to Semakau landfills. We're going to burn them, and we're going to dump the ashes into Semakau landfill. So it was rage. I was like, the rage was not because I was not understanding the situation and not accepting that it was a business reality, but it was more because he had to hire some construction workers from the neighboring industrial warehouse to pay them $4 an hour to help load up those Nike shoes into those containers, and they themselves not even being able to afford a pair of Nike shoes. And of course, I asked them, could we give them away to these workers because they don't look like they have Nike shoes on their foot, and yet they are throwing away and cutting up these Nike shoes into these containers. And he says, no, we're not supposed to. But of course, my dad, being a good humanitarian, did sneak out a few, but just don't tell the brands. So it was really rage. It was like, at such a young age, I was, I think, 16 or 17. And I was 20, now you know my age. So that was 20 years ago, and I realized that there's such an injustice there alone. And like, why are companies making so much profit from selling products at the same time when they have access of it, and they just throw it away, not thinking about the inequality that exists in the world? Like you said, there's always enough food for the world, but the question is inequality. The question is market inefficiency, and that's the problem that we continue to see today. And that's the problem I'm working to try to solve. It has taken a long time, and therefore it's a nurture versus nature problem. And we got to just keep working on it. It's a creative process, and we keep iterating. And I think today we've arrived with some clarity of what that means for us in order to work with the big companies who are behind throwing away this excess inventory. Hopefully, we can help reduce those inventory going to landfills or even oceans. I'll share more in details later.
Rage. And I think that's what triggers a lot of us to take action. And I think thank you for that sharing, because that really, unfortunately, this disposal of brand new, beautiful shoes still exists today. That's still a prevalent problem in the world. And I'm so glad that we've got people like yourself, Lynn, who are there to really change this, right? So thank you for sharing. Mathilda, let's hear your story. What triggered you, or what was your, tell us what got you to do what you're doing today.
It's a long story. How much time do you have?
Well, we have 3 minutes for a start, and then we'll ask more deeper questions.
Okay, so I have no background. I'm not a marine biologist. I'm not an environmental scientist. In fact, I used to be a TV producer with Channel News Asia. I used to be the head of social media for MediaCorp, StarHub, and DBS. In fact, there's a person here that I actually filmed and made like a 4-part series, and it's Leon. So I used to be behind the camera, and this is also where one of the additional things that I used to do is I used to paddle dragon boat. I don't have like a 6-pack or anything, but I did represent Singapore in a couple of races, and it was one particular race on the island of Boracay. It was just, it's a race that we all enjoy. It's the start of the year. We go there. It's 3 days. It's a weekend, and we paddle, and then we party. We have a great time. And how many of you have actually been to Boracay in the Philippines? But you've heard of it, right?
Yeah.
It's this jewel of tourism, in Philippines, and the millions that it brings in. In 2015, there was one particular race that I attended where everybody on the team, we had 120 people, everybody was like having some kind of stomach issue, wasn't feeling well. 20 people from the other Filipino teams had to be airlifted out of there. The official reason was it was bad rice, right? The rice basi. And we were like, I never had this kind of reaction with rice, and ain't nobody eating rice, we were all drinking beer. So we're like, maybe it's in the beer. What was the issue? In 2018, the news came out that President Duterte, president of the Philippines at the time, was going to close the island of Boracay for 6 to 7 months because it was discovered that untreated sewage from all of the developments, hotels, everything, restaurants, was going into the touristic beaches. Right, so that means that, most likely in 2015, all of us were swimming, paddling, diving in shit and piss. Add to that all waste generated on the island, right? Whether it's from the restaurants or whatever, that was also going into the touristic beaches, which doesn't make sense, right? If this is the $1 million money spinner, why would they do that to an economic, economic tourism powerhouse? And so I said, okay, I'm a TV producer. What am I going to do? I'm going to go and find the people who are addressing this issue. So I went for every single beach cleanup you could possibly think of. Every NGO that does a beach cleanup in Singapore, I went for it. And then I went, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. The conversation is about plastic waste, which is important, but nobody had any answers to what happened to me in Boracay. Now, in 2015, if I go back in time, I actually came back to Singapore, and within a few days, I was already in the hospital hours from landing in Changi Airport. In a month, I developed vitiligo. My hair turned all white. This whole area is just white. In fact, parts of my ears are also white, and parts of my body are also white. I'm wearing heavy makeup to conceal that. And so add to that, I started to develop these muscular spasms, difficulty to walk or to move, use my hands. And I lost my voice for 6 months. So if you are a Singapore idol, right, like a singer and a performer and a TV producer and your voice, and a radio DJ, your voice is important. Losing that for 6 months, that's a lot of income that goes down the toilet. Add to the fact that if you've got white patches popping up all over your body and you're not able to use your hands and feet, that's a real difficulty, especially if you're a dragon boat coach, not just a paddler, but a coach like myself. And so that's again where I said, look, I'm trying to figure out what's an answer here? How do you actually solve something like that? How do you solve ocean pollution that's chemical, that's sewage, that's everything all at once? And there were no answers. And that's again where, I was just curious and trying to find exactly what those answers were. And in typical producer fashion, if you can't find the answers, then you just kind of kick down the doors to figure out exactly where they are. Shoot first, ask questions later. And so that's what led me to this project.
That is one fascinating story. And by the way, I'm hearing this all for the first time myself. So I'm also trying to process this as we speak. I'm outraged at the unfortunate incident that happened in Boracay. I mean, the amount of sewage that might have been in the water to have caused what happened afterwards. And was the entire team affected? Was it just you or?
Out of 120 people who paddled in that year, only 20 of them still do dragon boat. The rest of them have different kinds of, it could be stomach issues, skin issues, but I seem to be the person that has the worst of all of them.
So the 100 people who suffered as a result of this. Now, this is something that I'm going to go back into your own motivations. Not all 100 have probably done what you're doing today. But you're doing what you're doing because you passionately believe in the cause. Tell us what sparked that desire to really want to make a difference. You know, as most people would say, look, it's happened, this sucks, it's shit, but I'm going to move on and do something else. But you've decided to really go into this problem and fix it, or try to at least alleviate it. Now, tell us what happened.
There's no Mother Teresa story where I was like, I felt moved, and the spirit of nature is what really spoke to me. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm a highly irritable person who doesn't have any patience at all. And so one of the difficulties that I experienced was I could not find answers as to why, for example, exposure to sewage in that water. And also the second bit of the story is how we noticed that something was wrong. There was a lot of green stuff that was floating out at sea, which is algae, right? It's like a overactive algae growth. And so that's again where there were no answers in terms of how all of these different things lead to what made me sick. And the fact that even having vitiligo was difficult to answer. But I do think that you mentioned out of the 120, right? Not all of them are doing what I'm doing. One of the difficulties for me was there was no way I was going to be able to produce or be in front of the camera or to sing, mainly because I'd lost my voice. And anybody in entertainment, nobody has any patience for that. They're not interested in oh, this happened to you. Okay, yeah. But whatever, you're not going to get the job. Definitely, for radio, once you're off air for 6 months, you're not coming back on air again. And so the only way for me to be able to explain to people what had happened and why this was important to me was for me to actually turn myself into a case study of finding answers. So I think there's no Oprah Winfrey aha moment, unfortunately.
No, but still, that is a very, very sad story, firstly, but a very interesting one in on the course of what you're doing today. Now, before we go deeper into what you're doing, no pun intended, of course, you being in the ocean business, no one got that joke? Dad joke, it's okay. Before we get deeper into the ocean project that you're working on, now you get it. I'm going to go back to Liyana and tell us a bit about now we are fast forwarding 20 years from where you were, 20 years back. You looked at those shoes being disposed of and you're like, that's ridiculous, what a waste. But 20 years on, now you're doing what you're doing. Tell us a bit more about what you're doing and how this, in some way or the other, helps tackle the problem that you saw 20 years ago.
Well, to begin with, it's a big problem that has many parts and many people involved. It's tracing the entire supply chain. It's tracing back how did the goods get shipped to the warehouse. Are the people at the warehouse are responsible for it? Are the supply chain team people? Are the people is it the waste disposal teams that are responsible for it because they didn't do an accurate stock down? Or was it the customer's fault because they didn't actually buy enough of those shoes, right? So it's a combination of really understanding, there are many parts and processes involved, like planning, demand. There is the marketing and distribution, and then there is the last bit. So what we're seeing at not the tip, but rather underneath it, many layers underneath it, it's kind of like an iceberg, right? When you dig down, like in her case, I think iceberg is a pretty good analogy, ocean team and everything. But in my case, when you kind of first investigate and at a warehouse, you kind of ask some folks there, and my dad say it's a perennial problem. It's not an overnight discovery that, oh, suddenly I'm going to use technology, I'm going to build the solution, and I'm going to like force it on them, and they use it and they would take the problem away. I had to grow up from that eco sort of warrior girl with, this ideal of wanting to reduce business waste or what we call here product waste from excess inventory. I had to wear the suit, right? I had to go into these meetings. I had to learn the ways of how big manufacturers like the clients we work with, Unilever, L'Oreal in 6-7 countries, to really understand and develop this common language of, do you understand that we have this problem from your side? What is this problem called? And it's called excess inventory. And in our land, it's like, we want to reduce this product waste, excess inventory going to landfills, right? So building that common language of a system requires a lot of, of course, curiosity and digging deep, asking your never-ending whys and why and why and why and why. But it's also tedious because it's also change management involved. And that has taken a long time to really understand the different work streams and different workflows that are involved in tackling one big problem. It's the entire supply chain, like I said, end-to-end solution. In fact, when we started Pollen, it was because there was actually a lot of questions around why do brands always end up with excess inventory. That's how we first started. Our first hypothesis was to find out is it possible not to have excess inventory at all. So we got the answer. It turns out that every vertical in the industrial manufacturing supply chain would always maintain a 30-45% level of excess inventory. That's a fact, number one, that you have to accept. So whenever they manufacture products, they will always produce, instead of 100%, 130%. Why? Because these manufacturers are expected to actually make profit, maximize for profit. It doesn't matter whether there is demand or no demand. The point is, especially when there is a holiday coming up, or there is a Valentine season or whatever, they would expect that they would be able to clear that 30-40%. However, the other issue that we realized was, as we asked them, is it possible, do you always clear that 30-40%? They said, at minimum, we would try to still keep 10% of the 30-40% in our warehouse, just in case. I said, why we do that? It's just the way things work, right? So what happens is that, on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis, you get a accumulation of that excess inventory over time. It's impossible, right? But the manufacturers will want to clear the warehouse and maybe only limit to 10% remaining of excess inventory. The reason being is that they have a real cost to actually holding those excess inventory in the warehouse for longer than it is intended to be, because it starts to cost them money to store those excess inventory, which they are going to be losing money from anyway because they're not able to recover the cost from producing those excess inventory. So I had to learn that manufacturers exist to make money, number one, make profit. Number two, which is to reduce cost. And that is the language that we started off with. And from there, we realized that what do we need to solve this problem? What do we need better? So it seems like we need systems. We need to understand data, and we need to understand the different teams who may not have access to data to understand that, the changes, the rate of change of quantity levels of inventory, it fluctuates over time. So I think we're talking about in a business environment where the primary activity is to produce and promote and distribute. So there weren't really innovations in terms of using the data or actually opening up the data transparency across different teams in the same supply chain company to actively reduce the number of stocks. So when it comes to pushing down to the supply chain teams, it's like, oh, that's your KPI. Your KPI is to clear the warehouse. We don't care how you do it, but you got to find your set of buyers, you got to clear the warehouse. At the end of the day, it must come, the cost of actually keeping those excess inventory has to go down, and that would make your supervisor or your higher ups really happy when you are able to reduce the cost. So a lot of it is really understanding that money drives decisions. And people get very emotional about holding on to their excess inventory as if, you're like one of those people trying to sell your stuff on carousel, that kind of analogy. You get really emotional over stuff that you know that you're not using it anymore, you're going to clear it. But then again, you don't want those low ballers to kind of tell you what price you should let it go at, right? Whatever item that you're trying to sell. So it's the same. There's a lot of emotionality involved. And there's also the pressure to maintain sort of the cost, the price. So to cut the story short, we had to work with them over a multi-year relationship to really first look at one problem and solve for that one problem. And over time, this is where we end up, where we realize that it's impossible for a small startup to take on to try to solve everything, since we're connecting both ends of the market, buyers and sellers, right? If you look at the 3R framework, there's reuse, reduce, recycle, right? But in the business world, we are not talking about recycling. We're not talking about reducing yet. When you should actually help them to resell, you should help them to get back the money that they think they already spent on manufacturing those excess inventory. So at the end of the day, yes, money drives the world, money drives decision, and that's the language. To reiterate my first point is to develop a common language so that we can actually collaborate and we can push the agenda of reducing those excess inventory numbers down, really down, so that they don't have anything left to be even disposed of in the oceans and landfills.
Thank you. I mean, that's going to take a long time, of course, because as you said, money drives things. And for these companies, the 30% excess inventory that they create, they actually make up the money in the 100% that they sell because they bake that into the costs. So what we're paying for is that 130% when we're only getting that 100%.
Yeah.
Let's move over to you, Mathilda. So, you talked about this really, I would say, transformational moment in Boracay, about 10 years back, that led to, yourself being hospitalized, losing your voice, and having vertigo, right?
Vitiligo.
Vitiligo, sorry. And that's a serious thing that happened. And so what then spurred you to do what you're doing right now? And how are you actually tackling the issue that you've seen back then, 10 years ago? What are you actually doing with your Ocean Purpose project?
So actually, I found what Lee was sharing very interesting, because there's also a great emotionality, on conversion of ocean pollution into solutions. So that's what we focus on. The reason why the company it's not called the Ocean Startup. It's actually called Ocean Purpose Project, mainly because we're coming up with multiple projects that are addressing all of what we're looking at. Ocean pollution as a spectrum, and we're literally saying, okay, all of the different constituents of what makes up ocean pollution. How do we solution for that? How do we actually create solutions that are very grounded, not just on the latest science and technology that's available, but also on, I think what you were mentioning, which is you really study internally, right? What are the cost centers, the profit, needs of the company, and also where does responsibility start and end?
Yep.
And that's also something that's very interesting on what we focus on. So for example, the first 3 Ocean Purpose projects to launch, the first one was plastic to hydrogen. So what's interesting that we work on is how do we take all forms of plastic, even styrofoam, even let's say a shoe that's been floating from Batam and Bintan all the way to Singapore, that's got a whole host of organic matter on it. How do we turn that material that has multiple different types of plastics from 1 to 7 and convert that into fuels, low sulfur fuels, and of course with the ultimate aim of being able to generate hydrogen from that. So that's again where the mapping of this, whether it's done in a thermal way, photo way, or whether it's by chemical catalyst. The mapping of all of this is again where, as an Ocean Purpose project, we say we're a small startup. It's not our role to go off and tell scientists I can build a better machine. It's literally about saying, how do we take all of the knowledge base that's out there, some of the latest stuff that's being cooked up, right? Behind labs that is not actually being shared, and figure out how we can create a case study for us to implement. Easier said than done, right? It's like, it sounds like such a great idea. Yeah, let's bring all these universities together, man. Like, we can do it. Nobody wants to work with each other, right? Because everybody's like, this is my idea. I'm ready to monetize first. So that's one of the challenges. But what I will share with you is, this is again where we're talking about a game changer. Now, I'll give you your example as a case in point. If you had a factory, or let's say the World of Sports outlet, right, that had excess inventory that's sitting on it, if they of course, they need to generate energy, right, for their processes. If they actually had a plastic to hydrogen or a plastic to energy unit in there, they could turn all of that excess stock into energy. Now, of course, emissions, right? That's why everybody is looking at me and going like, emissions. The work that we're working on is to figure out how do we capture and create systems of 100% emission capture. Plastic is really not, it's a design issue. It's a people issue. It's also a resource optimization issue. So that's the plastic project. The other project that we work on is really saying, what happened to me in Boracay? Firstly, if you have a government agency that handles sewage or water, that shouldn't have happened at all. Secondly, the answer was actually there when we were paddling, swimming around. It's that green stuff that was washing up on the beaches. That green stuff was excessive algae growth because of the high amount of sewage, nutrient that was in the water. Now, any marine biologist would look at that and say okay, this is a problem. There's too much nutrient. That algae is like a signal that that's happening. Algae is not good or bad. It's literally just reacting to what's in the environment, which is what that other project is about, which is literally saying, how do we figure out how we can actually hack what algae does and how it reacts, and figure out a system, a nature-based system for us to be able to absorb excess chemicals in the water and also bacteria to regulate that, and also sewage. So that's one of the projects that we're actually working on in Pasir Ris. So whatever I'm saying, right, it's not a paper exercise or a bunch of fancy decks or a cool TikTok video. It's literally stuff that we've been trialing, failing again, and continuously workshopping from our beach office in Pasir Ris. So that's two of the projects that we're working on. But it's literally about mapping all of the various types of pollution and saying, how do we create a profit motive? How do we also solve the issue? How do we also create new products and services that can come from that and address issues and gaps and challenges that are currently in these spaces that can actually lead to positive economic outcomes for especially coastal communities. I'll drop you a number. 9 out of 10 of the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, touch the sea. 9 out of 10. I just read about 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic out at sea right now, 40% of which comes from Asia. And so you put these things together, now you literally have a resource. How do you actually find the various ways to be able to tap that resource? One that nobody wants to touch, and figure out a way that makes it so it's so enticing that countries, companies would be silly not to go off and monetize that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a commonality in what both Liyana and Mathilda are telling us, and that story is really about working with those very corporations that you're trying to rail against, right? These are the big industry people who are polluting the environment. You don't go there and fight them. You go work with them. As you had said, you talk their language, right? And as you said, you work with them and work with others to build the ecosystem for collaboration. That's not easy. Have you encountered any bullies within the big industry who come and tell you, stop what you're doing, get out of our world, you don't know what you're talking about, who are you? Have you encountered such people, and how did you respond?
I like to add to, I feel like, Mathilda is my soul sister from another mother. Like, it's really passionate of, trying to solve this problem, looking at it from the ocean's perspective. I'm really passionate about stop going to landfills, because I think landfills and oceans are connected. And I actually spent quite a bit of time, I was sharing with Ting Ting, our host and organizer here, that how can it be that Asia being so small and Asia being, at the epicenter of, the purveyor of eating organic food and healthy food, right? We don't have so much processed food as compared to, I would say, the United States and where it is, right? If you go to Thailand, a lot of stuff that, the desserts are mainly organic. And then there's a flourishing manufacturing industry there that focuses on actually embedding more ecological friendly practices into manufacturing rather than, just wholesale take a technology from the Europe or US and then just adapt it. So I think we're trying on the ground. Manufacturers have a large awareness. They do know that in Asia, the size of lentils are actually the most as compared to anywhere else in the world. And I actually read a case study by Red Cycle. Red Cycle is a company started in New York that does recycling programs across New York City. Because at one time in New York City, there was actually a landfill. But they made that landfill disappear in a period of 10 years.
Staten Island, is it?
Yes,
Staten.
that's right. And I also make a visit to South Korea. And at one point, South Korea also has a landfill, which they managed to make disappear. It's actually now turned into a field of very beautiful lavender fields, the lavender flower fields. I went there and I was really impressed that now instead of a landfill, not reeking of any smell, it's actually a very beautiful tourist site. And I dig deeper and I try to understand how they do that. It's because Korea being one of the most developed economies in Asia Pac, they have a lot of money to spend in terms of R&D and to build the state-of-the-art waste disposal management systems. Like whatever Mathilda was saying about the repercussions that we're dealing with, the pollution in the oceans, we need government funding and we need state funding to invest in the latest state-of-the-art just to make sure that our sanitation and our filtration systems and all that are actually filtering all this away from getting into contact with human beings. But the point is that so long as we keep having corporates dumping into landfills and those gases and water underneath, the truth is that water runs under our lands. We just cannot see it, right? In Singapore, we see a lot of construction, and I was even amazed why we could even dig all the way 7 stories down underground and not see water. I think there is water down underneath and water flows. So imagine having a landfill that has been harvested with a lot of waste for many, many years and having all those, I would say oils coming out of plastic and stuff, seepage going down underneath and all that flowing into our oceans. That's one way. Another way is outright dumping of, I would say, 10 million bottles of shampoo onto oceans, in Indian Ocean, for example. We heard the reason why pollen is privy to such data is because when we lost a deal that we could not resell, right, it just means that it's going to end up into landfill, especially near expiry products. And the reality is that some of these companies do not even bother to take apart the ingredients and the plastic bottles. They just outright wholesale. The reason is because they pass it to someone else to clear it from their warehouse, but those people are not honest and they are not credible enough to do a great job. That, of course, you think that you hide your problem away, but those people don't do a great job. Ultimately, it will backfire your brand. Someday we know that those bottles are floating across the ocean somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a big problem. And I think that it's time that we take action. It's time that we say, no, this is not the ways of working anymore. But how do we do that? At Pollen, the way we do that, we realize it's such a big problem. Supply chain teams are not equipped with the tools, latest, I would say, data science or latest way to retrieve market data in real time. Because everything is about price sensitivity. It's about the buyer says, hey, I'm not paying this price because your product has this shelf life anymore. You expect me to absorb the cost and I need to pay for shipping. And then you put a lot of restrictions. I can't even move this product here, product there. So what do you want me to do with it? I'm not a charity. I need to make a profit at the end too, right? So it's very hard to orchestrate already, like make the deal happen even, from our standpoint as a startup. And that's the reason why we've invested a lot of R&D into data science and building machine learning models to make sure that we get the right price, right product, right condition of the product to the right buyer at the right time. Because it's very important, or else we're going to do very, very bad for the environment.
Thank you. And again, going back to the question though, have you had any big industry companies that have come to you and said, don't do this, stop?
I would say more of a retaliation from
name and shame, girl. Name and shame.
Yeah, name and shame.
I would say the jobbers and traders who says, hey, I want access to this. I'm not going to take it. You tell your sellers, I want this price. I'm going to go to another seller, another place. I'm going to parallel imports. I'm going to like legally import the stuff and then I'm going to still dump them anyway. So there are many parties involved. It's navigating all ways of doing trading. That's how the world works. And Pollen's existence is being threatened because we're trying to bring transparency, data transparency in supply chains. We're trying to bring optionality. We're trying to embed sustainability principles, along down the supply chain. So we got a lot of retaliation, and we got of course, the big competitors to the customers that we're working with. But in the end, now today, I think we managed to work with all of them. We're non-partisan. We just say we want to work with everyone. We want to solve your problem, but we'll give you market data that you are lacking internally to evaluate your offers, evaluate your deals, because you think that your price is always cost-driven by your manufacturing cost. But the truth is that in order to clear this, you need the other side of the market. You need the buyers to understand that you have this cost, you have this asking price, but at the same time, they have cost to absorb because you are putting too much restrictions. There are product restrictions down to the school batch variant, right? Like, I won't send this to, you can sell me this, but you cannot go to Asia Pac, cannot go to Africa. There's a lot of dumping that happens in Africa and Pakistan, and you know that, right? So the thing is, they always make these last minute decisions. And sometimes by the time you transport them due to delays in cargo and whatever, the product reaches the land of Africa, for example, when it's already expired. What do you expect to do with those products? People can't even sell it anymore. People can't even consume it. It's not safe. So what I heard, the supplier say, it's okay to use our makeup even when it's 3 months expired. Okay, but I won't do that. But will you let another human being do that just because they are buying it in such a low price? It's not right. It's
Definitely,
not right.
yeah. I mean, that doesn't sound very ethical, right? Mathilda, tell us any big corporations. I mean, you don't have to name them here, but I mean, have you felt any pressure from big industry to stop what you're doing?
No, the exact opposite.
That's great. So they are very supportive of what you're doing.
Oh, no. It's your people in sustainability and the NGOs who are like, no. Plastic to fuel. Look at all of these things like, that I've seen on the internet. Right. That sounds like a terrible idea. Nobody's ever, you're not even an engineer. How can you go off and talk about plastic to hydrogen? What do you mean you had a conversation with a couple of scientists from NTU and NUS, and then you are going to go off and create a machine? Mm-hmm. And I find it's very, very interesting because the conversation coming out of the sustainability industry is very interesting because every single thing that we propose right at the get-go, the first naysayers are our fellow NGOs in the ocean conservation space, people who are also in sustainability who've literally gone like, what is this? I don't get it. I've literally been like a good friend of mine who is actually my boss. He used to be my boss as a TV producer. He introduced me to a gentleman who is like the mentor in waste management scene, right? The ultimate mentor. And I was like, this is going to be great. He's going to review the technology. He's going to really kind of and I was like, give it to me straight, right? No chaser. I want to hear what you think about the scalability of our units, our plastic to hydrogen units, the different kind of feedstock, the issue around the chemical catalyst, all of that. And we spent 2 hours with him just constantly repeating who are you? You're the Singapore Idol girl. You're an entertainer. You're a singer. You should be in a pub. You shouldn't be focusing on this. And I was like, I know, but I kind of am. So why don't we just cut to the chase and get to the actual, point? He's like, no. You are the wrong face to be fronting this. You are not the right person that we need championing this stuff. And I was kind of like, I know. But why don't you just take a look at the 50-page report, right? And you can slam me, for about 80% of this conversation. But for the 20%, since I came all the way, why don't you just look at it and and give me some actual numbers? And so it's very interesting because 2 years later, the big bad Shell actually said, okay, we're going to select you as one of the 5 startups from Singapore that will be part of the Shell startup engine. And we're going to give you not just 1, not 2, not 10, but 42 engineers from all Shell's offices to sit and work on your plastic to hydrogen solution. Dude has been trying to ask me for coffee ever since. And this is again where I'm like, why does it have to take Shell literally doing this with us? It's the same blueprint. It's the same bunch of engineers, right? Why do we have to go this long-winded route? And I do think that one of the issues also is that within Singapore, we talk about project origination. We've got a lot of people talking about sustainability, very few people who are actually doing the projects on the ground or at sea.
Right.
The Singaporeans that are doing the projects on the ground or at sea are not necessarily in Singapore, executing on these projects. And that's one of the difficulties that we have, is that there is a fixation on marketing and the glossy sustainability image, and really not the kind of support that is given to those who are actually the innovators or the scientists or the people that are building product, let alone saying to them, like, let's say you're coming up with a vegan bakwa. I'm going to give you 5 months rental free, go off and go wild, build your product. You know, and that's also part of the difficulty, right? Like, you know, that we're not talking about here, that, like, you know, it's also an issue that it requires you to be famous all over the world before finally somebody like just next door goes, okay, hey, remember 3 years, 4 years ago, you're talking about this thing? I'm very interested now. Now that, like, you know, President Obama like took photo with you, right? Now I'm interested.
Yeah.
But when you were knocking on the door, right, like, you know, and begging for, like, you know, like a $2,000 just to be able to, like, you know, pay your engineers, yeah, that was not going to cut it. And I do think, like, those who survive are the ones that, like, you know, eventually do get to make some market penetration, as long as you don't get killed. Like, just to put this into perspective, just last year alone, 3,000 SMEs in the F&B space closed shop. We're not even talking about how many SMEs, right, in other industries closed shop. That's an average of about 200, like, you know, like F&B startups that closed last year. We're talking about in Singapore. Now, you add that to all of the pressures of, let's say, a sustainability startup, right? Yeah. And also the political pressures out there, where you have, like, certain governments that are not interested in anything to do with EPA or the dismantling
if it's not
agencies.
a transportation or energy project, they're like,
exactly, or exploding paper straws. This is a massive, terrible issue, you know, that we need to address, exploding paper straws. You know, so I think, like, once you go into that route, we're also going to see, like, a lot of the innovative people that have struggled to survive through COVID. And again, another thing that we're not talking about, all the startup founders that struggled to survive through COVID. The moment that restrictions came up, we were back to, like, business as usual. Nobody ever kind of, like, you know, spoke to us and said, how are you handling this mentally? Or how were you able to kind of channel all of your savings, right, and sell your furniture to keep the lights on and to keep your staff paid? We're just rolling forward with that. And this is, again, where you see this massive amount of, like, you know, like startup death. You see this massive amount of innovation death. And once we go in the space, you also see industry go, yeah, then I think the need for us to invest in these spaces. Also, why don't we focus on the sure wins as well? So I think that's the uncomfortable truth that I do have to mention as well, that, like, I found.
I like what Mathilda say, you know, like her platform, her purpose, it's so powerful, you know, as a, you know, the advocacy, the work that she does, communicating for us, you know, techies, I would say, innovators on the ground, right? Even as myself, you know, I'm not the CEO of the company, even though the genesis, it's tightly tied to my story. And I was fortunate enough, I know that, you know, I like the business acumen. I had to hire someone who is more, I would say, great in the business room, right? Someone with a JD in law. He can write all those contracts with the corporates and deal with that stuff that I'm not great at. And yeah, and I would say that I also happen to be one of the startups actually started in 2018. And then I was in KL, you know, for 3 years stranded because of COVID. And fundraising was a challenge. However, we were lucky. We were part of Unilever Foundry program. It was strange. We found validation of the problem because we worked with Unilever Singapore and then Unilever Malaysia and then Unilever Thailand. It resonated. Now, the Unilevers are not the same companies across Asia Pac. They are managed independently. So you kind of have to win over them each individually. And
just because you have one Unilever doesn't mean you get all of them, right?
Exactly. They're different, right? Different stakeholders internally, different thing, and doing everything on that. So we realized quickly there is something there, right? And we held on to that, and we have to make money first. And our first business model was actually a marketplace. Just take the inventory and flip it and sell that, right? To stay afloat, because the investors are not really understanding, not seeing the problem we're seeing. Of course, we're going to say from day one, we're going to build this AI agent workflows and make it easy for them who don't have any resources, like to execute on the different flows, right? You're asking supply chain team people who study logistics to find buyers and to negotiate on price. That's not the job, right? So we need to create, basically we understood the problem really well, and it has taken about 7 years to find
create
the
your own
clarity,
market.
to create our market, to create our USP, to create the product that we have today. And we're rolling it out because we understood that, fine, we know you don't have extra team member. We know you don't have a data scientist on your team to look on just this excess inventory, which is the end of your supply chain. So we are going to create it. We're going to focus on this niche. We're going to help you. So all you need to do is pay a subscription fee, and we handle everything for you. Easy. Make your problem disappear from the warehouse. That's what we do.
That's wonderful. I'm going to pause here for questions from the audience. If there's anything that you'd like to ask, any burning questions with no carbon emissions, hopefully.
Oh, that's one of the
puns, yeah.
Sexy, I would say, sustainably startup hot space that gets a lot of funding.
All the carbon credit people. No, it's alternative meat.
Yeah, well, alternative meat is you said vegan bakwa, right? For those who don't know, bakwa is barbecued pork, right?
Yeah, so, girl, Sophie, you make that vegan tempeh bakwa is pretty good. I'm just going to put that plug out there for her. Yes.
Over there, we have a question.
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question. I would be honest to say yes and no. Yes, I had to focus on specific verticals. I had basically investment thesis that I need to prove, and I had to sort of, like a scientist, I need to create my experiment control station, and I have to deal with a set of variables I need to control and produce certain results, right? So we decided to narrow down to consumer packaged companies. The problem when I saw with Nike or that's apparel lifestyle, which is a vertical sector that we still do, but however, what I learned in the process of trying to solve this problem over like 7 years at Pollen, that with fashion is really, really hard. There are no margins. There are no money in reselling fashion, and that's just
and it's
really,
then
really sad.
By choice, right?
Yes.
The brands also put that in by choice because it reduces the value of the
Correct.
brand.
Like, for example, Levi's, I would say, we even in fact had someone who joined us from ex-Levi's who was doing liquidation. Liquidation is the act of clearing excess inventory from warehouse. For I think several years, he was managing 8 different markets, and he's very familiar with the problem on the ground. He's very familiar with the decisions made by the upper management as with regards to excess inventory. Sometimes they artificially inflate the price or lower the price because they want to make space for the incoming collection. They want to drive demand for those things, so they have to drive down the price. So maybe we think that a pair of Levi's jeans may from last season may not be worth as much as the new one. So it incentivizes us to go to the store and buy the latest one and buy the latest one for a higher price because that's the in thing. When in reality, we look at the comparative jeans material, it's the same. It's just a different cutting, different stitches or whatever, right? So sometimes it's color, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You need a pair of jeans, you wear it in whatever color you want. So if you're not fashion conscious, you're not into the stylo-milo, so you won't mind. But I think that there's a lot to say about consumerism being driven by some of these companies. Like I said, their mandate is to manufacture, market, promote, and then distribute. They do a lot of it of promotion, which is why it goes back to my point, why we have to build these AI agents who understand specific things that we need to do along the journey of reducing this waste in the supply chain. We have Dahlia agent, who is the demand analyst. We have Fern, who is the pricing analyst. We have Sage, who is the channel, sales channel analyst, right, who answers any questions you have about future sales, around future states, based on down to the level of the profile of the product. We had to do that for them because they invest a lot of money on R&D to solve problems for manufacturing. Like I said, they look into new trends in sustainability. Like, for example, how do I make products that are use less plastic? How do I make, let's say, L'Oreal, the packaging more, environmental friendly, like boxes instead of previously they were using glass, right? So a lot of it is paid attention into what goes into the new line of products to sort of appease consumers who are more environmental conscious these days, but you're not looking at the tail and whatever the mess that they have created that's going down through the funnel that ends up in oceans and landfills. So
I have a question.
that is the issue that I feel like it's a no, but at least we're trying to reduce the impact, at the tail end.
I have a question for you on that.
Sure.
So with all your Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 regulations that are coming up, do you think that brands are interested in actually taking their waste and repurposing it into specific sustainable lines? So for example, Adidas already has this partnership with Pali where they take ocean-bound plastic, right? That's another story.
Yeah.
That's another 3 or 4 hours of chit-chat to have about that. But what would be interesting is if, let's say, a Nike, in this example that you've given, all of those like collections of clothes for Levi's and Nike, if those were actually repurposed within the Nike supply chain into a sustainable line, do you think, you meet these brands, do you think that they're actually interested in creating these new products?
They are, but it also depends on who they hire as their chief sustainability and whoever is actually running the manufacturing innovations people. Are they talking to each other? Sometimes they're too, I would say they're too focused on what they have to do day to day that they're not talking, these topics are not being bubbled up and they're not actually cross-pollination, or pollen we call it. They're not cross-pollinating. We're trying to pollinate the buyers and sellers, and so that we can reduce waste, and then, every seed that they throw into the oceans ends up, becoming a flower being used by the consumers, right? So sorry, just to put a very natural, nature-inspired, I would say, analogy there, which is why my company is called Pollen, because the purpose is to serve nature in the first place, right? To take away all those pollens. Pollens are this thing that they're so annoying. When when it doesn't actually leave to serve its purpose of becoming a flower or fruit, right? It's just annoying because people get allergies from it. So the same is the problem with excess inventory. It's like this fat that's clogging your arteries, you're not letting you function really, really well. So our job is to take that away. So I think back to Mathilda, I think they are interested. The problem is people are not talking, even internally to solve the excess waste problem. There are a lot of silos. There's a lot of data silos. There's a lot of not relying on data. They're not even documenting it really well to understand, hey, if you check your yearly historical, if you check your monthly historical, you would already see the pattern forming and you would actually try to take proactive actions for prevention. Why are you still lazy? Right? So
because that's money being left on the table.
Exactly.
It sounds like to me, because I think a Gen Z generation is willing to pay a premium.
No, but they would hire McKinsey or BCG to kind of do that for them.
McKinsey and BCG.
It's
How many of you in the audience?
We run as the external innovation project.
Are you paying attention, McKinsey, BCG? Write this down.
So tell me, thanks for the question, by the way. Is there any other question here any other burning questions? Because I have a question for the both of you. What are you currently looking for your respective organizations? Are you looking for people, money? Are you looking for, what are you looking for? Or maybe not one thing, but two things. Let us all know. Bring it out. Share with the universe, because someone somewhere out there could help you.
Okay.
What are you looking for Poland? Or you can start with Ocean Purpose Project.
Yeah, I have. There's a project that we're working on. It's called Project Tanah Air. Anybody speaks Malay here?
I do.
Sikit, Saja.
Yeah, okay. So Tanah means land, Air means water, but together the word actually means homeland. So this is again where we've already been doing this since 2020, where we work with fish farmers in the north of Singapore. There's one particular farm that we've worked at, and we've managed to put data together to prove already that this little farm, which is probably like the size of this hall here, we've actually built seaweed and mussel lines that surround the floating fish farm. And as of 2023, we've conclusively found out that our seaweed and mussel lines have filtered 14.7 million liters of water. One small itty-bitty fish farm. The additional aspect of this is to be able to understand exactly what's the nutrient exchange that's happening, how much of carbon our seaweed and mussel lines are actually absorbing, drawing up all of this kind of data and being able to create a Vera certification for blue carbon credit. Now, this is again where we are also the first in Singapore to actually take that seaweed and mussels, sequester it in a national park. It's the first seaweed carbon sequestration project in Singapore. Now, the issue here is that it's so new. and it's multifaceted and also involves having to get farmers involved. Add to the fact that there is existing algae bloom that is closing farms. Just last year, from last year's Chinese New Year to this year, there was a massive bacteria outbreak for a year that led to the decimation of farms in Pasir Ris. A farm was closing almost every week. This is again where, despite that, our farm is actually still supplying fish. Chinese New Year, they supplied at least 4 tons of grouper, golden snapper, red snapper, as well as mussels.
So you want us to buy the fish?
No. What I want you guys to do is we actually need support for multiple Project Tanah Air in Southeast Asia.
Okay, how can we help?
So we lost a kind of a discussion of US aid supporting us with about 350K to roll this out throughout Southeast Asia. So the question is, how do we actually, I'm looking for partners that would be able to help us roll that out. Mainly because it's a very, very effective way of mobilizing your farming community, the fish farming community, especially those who are traditional farmers. It's not the high-tech guys who receive millions in grants. These are the small-scale fish farmers, the mom and pops, who don't have support, who can literally clean their waters, clean the coastal areas around them, but also create jobs for them and create an economic incentive and income and livelihood for them. That's basically what we're looking to do. You might not have that cash, but, you may, I don't know. You might. But you might actually know of a way that the project could be implemented and scaled. We've already proven that it works. We've already proven that there is ammonia, nitrite, carbon that is already being absorbed by these nature-based solutions. And this is again where now it's literally saying, how do we take that and scale that? So that's the call. That's the call.
No, it's great. I think anyone here who's interested, spread the news. You're looking for partners who can help you to take this model and use it in other small fish farms around Asia, right?
That's right.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Liyana, what are you looking for? What do you want? Tell us bring it out to the universe.
Well, we definitely want to scale our impact. We've been tracking the kgs. As a small startup, we alone can do so much. But I think that we manage, over 1 million plus tons of plastics packaged goods from going to landfills. We diverted it away. We know that it's still good to use as we get smarter, our machine learning gets smarter, with prediction gets faster. Hopefully we can push more to be sold even before it gets, it gets expired, because the point is we still want to preserve the value. We still want people to use it. Every product should end every product should end up in the hands of the consumer. It doesn't matter what the price, at the end of the day, we just all must do our part. So I appreciate partners who have, distribution points across Asia Pacific. I think a lot of the stock, sometimes they come from the EU, US, ends up in the Unilever or L'Oreal warehouses in Asia, right? So the thing is that we're given we have restrictions where we cannot saturate the certain channels, right? The channel partners, the supermarket and that, because they already have a limited space and they won't buy more. At the same time, they cannot sell more to them. So we need to be creative about ways of distributing some of those excess inventory. If you run a discount store, or anyone who runs a discount store all over Asia, with footprint over Asia or the rest of the world, it doesn't matter. Pass them to us, we will onboard them and we will try to, hopefully make that deal happen.
The value dollar lady is my neighbor. Okay, sure, I can do that.
Yeah. So actually, Radha Exports, who runs, I would say, the Value $1 store, they're a big customer of us. We did try to run a pilot called Pollen Safe, where we actually try to clear the 6 months or less products through our channels here. We did a pilot with Carousel's Reef Batch. So we actually put polling sort of a small rack, clearance rack at the thing. It worked. However, to scale that up, it will require a lot of money and stuff. And we're a tech startup, so we want to focus on the pricing. We want to focus on the B2B deals. That's where I think the impact would happen, right? Because in large sheer amount, you're talking about 10 feet, 40 feet containers of stuff that you're preventing from entering oceans and landfills. So that's where we want. Of course, we always need funding, but in order to reach funding, we always need to hit our KPIs and goals. That's the reality of it. I want to meet more smart people who want to work on the models, refine the models that we have internally. So any engineers, smart people want to join my technical team, more than happy. Then that, yes, partners, passionate advocates, spread a good word about what we're doing, and hopefully more people can hear more about what we're doing and come and write to us, contact@pollen.tech, and happy to take your questions away and even to brainstorm new ideas on how we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for this really interesting conversation today.
Yeah.
There will be time, of course, after this for you guys to continue the conversation. But wow, I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Dr. Nadir, and thank you, ladies, for such a great ending to day one of our summit. Round of applause, please.